Hello Aurora lovers, I'm Dale Bone from Dale Bone Imaging. This is Aurora Hunting 101. Welcome to episode 5. What do aurora look like? Aurora can take many shapes, have many behaviors, and have a number of different colors. They can range anywhere from just an arc on the northern horizon to covering the entire sky. And they can be anywhere in between that. Most importantly, we see them differently than cameras do. When many people go to see them for the first time, they expect them to look like they do in colorful photographs. However, our eyes are much less sensitive to colors at night, so the aurora have paler colors and sometimes appear white. We also see less detail than what can be captured by cameras taking multi-second exposures. What we're better at than cameras is we can see the motion and the behavior as the aurora dances across the sky. To understand why what we see is so different from what cameras capture, I need to explain a little bit about how our eyes work. Our eyes detect light using two different types of photoreceptors. Photoreceptors are just the cells at the back of our eye that detect light. This information is then transferred through the optic nerve into our brain. The different types of photoreceptors are called rods and cones. Rods work in dim conditions and allow us to see at night. Unfortunately, they only provide black and white vision. Our color vision comes from the cones. There are 3 different types of cones which are sensitive to approximately red, green, and blue. Our brain combines the signals from these 3 different types of cones to create colorful images from our world, our TVs, and cell phones. The result is very dim aurora will only trigger our black and white sensitive rods. Brighter aurora will trigger our color sensitive ones, allowing us to see pale colors in the aurora. It's very common to be able to see subtle colors in brighter parts of the aurora and whites in the dimmer part. Let's take a look at some pictures. Alright, first let's talk about what you can expect to see in terms of visually what can we see with our eyes as opposed to what the camera can see. So this picture I took in Saskatoon in the edge of a residential area along the riverbank. It is a relatively dark area, but you can still see that the snow and the benches have light on them from street lights in the area. Across the river is also fairly dark. It's not developed, so there's a fairly large buffer in terms of light pollution. Further out, there's some more newer development, but in general, this is a relatively dark place in Saskatoon. And the aurora I've adjusted the color in this to try and match what I could see with my eyes. So I can maybe see a bit of pale green in the aurora, and then maybe just a hint of pinks or reds up through this pillar here. This wasn't particularly strong aurora. It was probably a KP3. It was a dark night. There are some clouds. There's probably some haze in the sky as well. Not perfect conditions, but when you go out for your first time, this is probably close to what you might expect to see. Of course, if you're in a darker location, there'll probably be more contrast and it'll be a little bit darker. The sky will be darker. That's why we try and get away from the city lights in general. A lot of people don't pay too much attention to the moon. This looks almost like a daylight picture, except the stars are in the sky. This was taken with a longer exposure during a full moon, actually a full supermoon. And again, the aurora were almost as strong as the one in the previous picture, but with the moon washing out the sky, it's much harder to see. You can just sort of see hints of the color and the structure in this band running behind the church. It's amazing how bright the full moon can be if you're not used to being out in a dark area at night. It certainly creates shadows. You can see a shadow. You can almost, well, you can probably read a newspaper by moonlight if you have to. Clouds are the other nemesis. And it depends on where they are and how bright the aurora is and how high up in the sky it is. So in this case, the aurora is climbing up fairly high in the sky, and you can tell it's aurora, not clouds, because I took a picture and it shows up green in the camera. Now if you're trying to look at that with your eyes, it'd be very hard to tell which is clouds and which is aurora, because you actually can't see that much of the color, right? They'll blend in and it'll be very hard to tell unless there's some other activity in its motion or something going on. And it doesn't take a whole lot of clouds. You know, this is a partially cloudy night. If you look up, you're going to be able to see stars, but down towards the horizon, those layers of clouds will pile up on the horizon and obscure your view lower down. So that's some ideas of what you can expect to see in terms of just conditions, reasonable clear conditions, moonlit conditions, and cloudy conditions. And then let's talk about the actual different shapes that the aurora can take. Actually, before that, this is a real-time video, so it was pushing my camera to the limit. This is a little bit older, but you can see some of the motion. So that's real-time. That would be something you could see with your eyes. You can see the motion along here and some of the slower motion throughout the rest of the aurora. It's amazing how much it can change in 20 or 30 seconds between pictures if you're taking longer exposure pictures. And that's where we're still better than cameras for the most part. And of course, our cell phones can also capture aurora nowadays. They've gotten much better at taking pictures at night. This is with a comparatively old Samsung Galaxy 9. Fairly nice aurora pictures. Not as, it's pretty reasonable. The stars are pretty sharp. You can see the colors. It's maybe not as bright a colors as taken with a digital SLR or mirrorless camera, but the cell phone cameras keep getting better and better every year. So in terms of the actual typical structure that we can see, so if the aurora is fairly weak and it's a long ways away from us, it'll be lower on the horizon. This was taken up in northern Saskatchewan. But what you see is that what you certainly see most of would be this aurora arc. So that's basically the front edge of the oval or the donut shape, and then that has a height as well, and you can see the height of it, and then as it goes up higher in the atmosphere, it interacts with different gases in the atmosphere, and you get different colors. And you also do, and when it's really low on the horizon, you sometimes also get almost like a sunset effect where the sun changes color and the moon changes color at sunset. You actually get that sort of behavior with aurora as well as the light passes through more atmosphere. So that's some of the color variation in there. This is not adjusted to the way you would see it. It's what the camera can capture. So you might have a lot of trouble seeing this upper band. There's actually, even more. There's a little bit of aurora up in here that might just look like a part of the sky that is a bit brighter, sort of like it does here. So as the aurora gets closer to you, you may start seeing more details. This is the same night, just a little while later. Actually, the moon has come up, so that's what the light source is. It's causing the shadows and the light on the snow here. And it's washing out the sky a little bit, which is making it harder to see. But now we're starting to see more structure in the aurora. We're seeing some spikes or pillars in the aurora. And then as it progresses, you may see larger spikes. The reds can be kind of hard to see with your eyes, but certainly you can see them. And often you can see additional bands forming further away from us, which appears as just another arc lower on the horizon. And often you can watch those slowly move towards you. It's kind of fun to do. Again, this is a fairly dark site. This is south of Saskatoon, actually quite a ways, and there's still a lot of light pollution here from Saskatoon. And then if you have, clouds, this is a time lapse. So if you take a bunch of pictures, 5 or 10 seconds each, and then convert it into a video, you compress the time so you can see the motion of the aurora. But this is significantly sped up, at least a factor of 100. But you can see the motion of the clouds, and you see the aurora dance around. You can see how much it changes in brightness and structure over time. So that's the sort of thing that we can watch with our eyes. This is almost the opposite cloud effect as that earlier one. That one had all the clouds on the horizon. This one is right on the edge of a cloud layer. So if I had gone maybe 10, 15 kilometers further north, I wouldn't have clouds above me. I would have driven past that edge of the clouds. And sometimes you can do that. If you look at the cloud map, you can take a look and see if there is a well-defined edge, and sometimes you can just drive away from the clouds. You can see the reds and the pillars, and it's just very sped up. Sometimes you get spirals, you get various ribbon shapes, you can have long bands of them, all sorts of different shapes. And there are some names for them. This is showing the spikes as purple instead of red. That's just really camera settings or the way it was edited. And then the structure can get more and more complicated. So there's a whole lot of different things going on in here, and that would be very active. Even though it's still fairly low on the horizon, which means it's still a fair distance away. And now here the aurora is basically overhead. You can think of this as looking at the oval here as it curves around, and you can get the aurora right overhead. When it's stronger, that's as close as it can be to you. And then you can also have other behaviors. Quite often energy accumulates over time and then gets released in a burst of aurora. Quite often you get this green, white, pink, not often, but when that happens, you often get these bands of really bright aurora. The aurora can vary in brightness considerably, at least a factor of 10, maybe a factor of 100. So it can get surprisingly bright. This is another picture where the aurora is really high up in the sky, but it's moonlit. That's why the church looks white. It looks like it's a daytime picture, but there's stars and aurora in the sky. And this is not moonlit. You get a lot more detail here. We're not getting much detail out of the aurora, even though it's probably higher up in the sky. And then when the aurora is directly overhead, we're often looking straight up into those ribbons or up into those pillars, and you get this effect that's called the corona, sort of the crown. And quite often people see shapes and figures and people and animals and various things in the patterns that the corona creates. In this episode, I described briefly how our eyes work differently during the day and night. At night, the rods in our eyes provide us with black and white vision unless the aurora is very bright. When the aurora is very bright, it will trigger the cones in our eyes, allowing us to see some color, but nothing like the colors modern cameras can capture using long exposures. We are better than cameras at seeing the motion of the aurora. Score 1 for the humans. And I also talked briefly about some of the shapes that aurora can take. With that, please check out episode 6, When Can I See the Aurora? And I'm wishing you clear skies and happy hunting.